All right. Hello, everybody. I think we are live. I'm a little bit early. So if we could just confirm in the chat, can you see me? Can you hear me? Can you see our slideshow? And then I'm going to go ahead and disappear while we wait for folks to roll in. Okay, amazing. Looks like we're good. I'm going to go ahead and just disappear, but I'll be back in about 4 minutes to go ahead and get started. Okay, and we are back. Again, hopefully everybody can see and hear me. I've been seeing a lot of folks talking about their test dates, talking about what they struggle with most on the test, talking about what they're nervous about, talking about what they're excited about. So thank you for being here. If you want to just say hi in the chat, hello, good to have you all here. We've got almost 100 folks in here already, which is awesome. We have a huge, huge group today. So really excited to get going. Welcome to our ACT live class on test and passage strategy. I'm Erika, excited to see you. So I'm Erika. Hello. Quick introduction about me. I'm the SAT and ACT Senior Curriculum Manager at Magoosh. Magoosh is, you're on our channel, the test prep company that is hosting this webinar. So what that means, being the Senior Curriculum Manager, I am the person who does a lot of the strategy for our lessons and our questions, figures out what's most important for you to learn, how to teach it, how to order it, all that good stuff. It also means that I have put together the curriculum for the live class that you're going to see today, as well as for our larger series of live classes, which is something that you can purchase from Magoosh. Over the years, I have taught and written materials for more than 10 different standardized tests. So a lot of them. SAT and ACT are my favorites though. They're the ones that I started with. They're the ones that I keep coming back to. So happy to be doing this today. I live in Seattle, Washington. I am from here. I've lived in a couple other places, but I'm back here now, which is really exciting. And I live with my husband and my 2 cats. You can see them there. That's Roz, that's Mal. They are my life. So if anyone else is a cat lover here, welcome. And if you're not, also welcome. Okay, so let's talk about the goals for today's session. So in today's session, we are going to review ACT structure, timing, and scoring. We're going to learn test taking strategies for getting the most points. So those are going to be specific to the ACT. So they're going to be different from strategies that you'll see for other tests, pretty similar to the ones that you'll see for, say, the SAT, but pretty different from ones you might see on tests at school. We're going to discuss how to study effectively. That's going to go relatively quickly. It's going to be applicable to if you're studying with Magoosh or studying with our live classes, or if you're studying on your own. So help for everybody out there. And then we're going to introduce passage strategy for ACT reading and science. Oh, glad you think my cats are cute. They are. So these are our 4 goals for today. We are going to be handling the first 3 bullets in the first hour of our class. So the first hour of our class, there may be a little bit of review in there for those of you who have taken the test before or have spent a while studying, but we're going to take that information and we're going to channel it into strategies that you may not be as familiar with, or you may not be sure on how to implement properly. I find that a lot of students think they're using these strategies, but maybe aren't. So that's going to be the first hour. That's going to be kind of broad across the test. And then the last bullet, the passage strategy part for ACT reading and science, that's going to be the last hour. And there we're going to dig into how to get through the passage with enough time to spare, so that we don't run out of time, but also so that we have enough from that passage that we can answer those questions effectively, that we're not going to fall for any of the traps, that we're not going to get stuck and fall into a pit of confusion. So that's our plan for the day. First hour, cross the test. Second hour, ACT reading and science. Okay, so I want to just shout out really quickly that the lesson that we are doing today is a slightly modified version of our first lesson from our live classes series. And this is something that is for purchase on our ACT Magoosh website. So it has all 8 of these lessons. So this is the first one. It's pretty broad, talks about test strategy, passage strategy. But then later in the course, we get into the reading questions and the science questions. And we get into 3 lessons of math, and we get into 2 lessons of English, as well as the writing section or the essay. So there are 2 hours of lesson 1, which is what we're doing today, but there are 16 hours total in these live classes. So if you come out of today and you're like, hey, this was awesome, but I want more, I want this more specific content. I want to build on this. I want to figure out how I can use these passage strategies more effectively with the questions. We have a special discount code today for our live classes, 20% off, which is a pretty big deal, with the code LIVE2021. So if you go to act.magoosh.com or sat.magoosh.com, it's available for both tests. You can use that code to get 20% off of our live classes. Our live classes are normally $3.99, so 20% is a pretty serious discount. I'll pop this code up again over the course of our lesson. So you can write it down now, but I'll pop it up again later. But if you don't sign up for it, don't worry. This class free today is still going to have a lot of really beneficial information for you. Okay. And yes, we will be interacting throughout the stream in the chat. Interaction is something that we do a lot in our live classes. The groups are obviously smaller than they are today, where we're closing in on 200 viewers. So I'm going to do my best to answer questions as we go, but I do want to shout out as well that we're going to have question and answer breaks, one halfway through and one at the end. I'm going to stay pretty much as long as I need to answer questions that come up. If you have anything that you want to ask about that isn't specifically related to this lesson, those breaks are going to be a great time to do it. Okay. So let's go ahead and jump in with ACT structure and timing. And I'm going to pop a bunch of numbers up on the slide. And if you're going, hey, these are not numbers that I want to remember, that is okay. Oh, and you know what? Before I do that, I'm going to jump back because I forgot. One thing that I don't have on this slide is that we are doing a free giveaway of one of these live classes at the end of the live stream. So stick around until the end and you can get it for free. So one lucky viewer. Your chances are 1 in 185 right now. Okay, jumping back. Yes, raffling off a class too. All right, so ACT structure and timing. So if you've taken a practice test before, this might be review. So we are starting with the English section. Always comes first, that's just the deal. And the English section is the one that deals with a lot of grammar stuff. So that's going to be stuff like punctuation, sentence structure, parallelism, modifiers, agreement, verb tense, a little bit of idioms, what else? Possessives, all that good stuff, right? Grammar. But it's also going to deal with a little bit of rhetoric. So that's going to be stuff like transitions, adding and deleting sentences. Those are fun. Reordering sentences, figuring out what fits the tone, what fits the goal, all of that good stuff. So the English section is 45 minutes and 75 questions. That is a lot of questions for not a lot of time. So we could come up with, how many seconds we have per question, but that's maybe not going to be super useful. We'll talk about that in a second. After the English section, we go to math. Math is 60 minutes and 60 questions. Really easy to remember. Love that. But it's long. And we only get, as you can probably see, 1 minute per question. That's kind of tough. After the math section, we have reading. Reading is going to be 35 minutes for 40 questions. And then science is actually the exact same, 35 minutes for 40 questions. Now, the way it's divided up is a little bit different. We'll talk about that in a second. Now, the last section is the writing section, which is sometimes known as the essay. And that's going to be 40 minutes for one essay. Now, if you are looking at these numbers and you're going, how am I supposed to remember all of these, or how am I supposed to use them? You're not supposed to use these numbers. These numbers are not particularly helpful. So I want to ask in the chat, who here struggles with time management on this test? And it could be on all of the sections, could be on one section, could be on two sections. Who here struggles at all with time management on the ACT? Let me know in the chat. All right, seeing a few folks. And be honest, I'm seeing some enthusiasm. Yeah. Okay, specifically for science and math. Yeah, same for me. Those are the ones that I struggle with. I find some folks struggle particularly on reading. Yeah, Kyle. Math, Christian, math and science, Diamond. Yeah. For reading, yeah, absolutely. So reading and science, those are actually very similar ones. We're going to talk about that. Yeah, everywhere. Relatable. Okay, yeah. So time management is one of the most difficult things on this exam, right? And that's because a lot of people look at these numbers and they don't know what to do with them. So there's a couple of places that we can go wrong here with time management. So one thing that some folks do with time management on this test is they just don't look at the clock, or they look at the clock totally randomly. And what that can result in is like doing a bunch of work. Oh yeah, I'm feeling fine, great. And we look at the clock and we realize we are way behind, like unsalvageably behind. And at that point, we start getting really nervous and we start like going as fast as we can, but we're not performing very well because we're so stressed out. And then maybe we don't finish or we have to guess a lot. And it's not great because we spent so much time on questions at the beginning, we end up not spending enough time at the end, or even vice versa. The other place that we can go wrong is we can go, okay, I'm going to look at the clock. And then we look at the clock for every single question or multiple times during a question. And then we end up so distracted by looking at the clock that we end up wasting time trying to save time. And we end up not doing our best work, again, because we're so stressed out. This is compounded by the fact that not every question is going to take the same amount of time, right? So in math, there are some questions that are going to go in 20 seconds, whereas there are some questions that are going to go in 2 minutes. We want to average out to a minute per question, but it's not going to be exact for each one. So when we're looking for every single question, we end up imposing this like artificial rule on ourselves and really getting stressed, right? And spending actually too little time on some questions and maybe too much time on others. This is maybe even worse in sections that have passages, because not only do we have to answer the questions, we have to get through the passage, right? So reading and science are particularly tricky for a lot of students to time because they just don't know how to break it down. So what should we do? And this is my first test-taking strategy of the day, which is to use multi-question timing checkpoints. We're not going to not look at the clock. We're not going to look at the clock randomly. We're not going to look at the clock every single question. We are going to, for each section, have a set number of questions where we go, okay, I'm going to do those without paying too much attention to the clock. And then I'm going to look at the clock. And then that's going to tell me if I'm on track or not. Then I can adjust the next chunk in order to get back on track. Now, one, this means that we're not looking at the clock too much, but we're looking at the clock enough with enough frequency that if we are a little bit off, we can adjust. So let's go see how this applies to our actual sections. So English is 45 minutes per 75 questions. Useless. But those 75 questions are broken up between 5 passages. Now that makes some nice math, because 45 minutes for 5 passages shrinks down to 9 minutes per passage. That I want you to memorize. If you on English stick to approximately 9 minutes per passage, you are going to finish the section on time. Love that, right? And what that then allows you to do is spend maybe a little bit different amounts of time on each question, right? So a question that's on something relatively simple like possessives, you can go really fast on. And then a question that's going to be much more complicated like sentence ordering, you can spend significantly more time on. Now, at the end, you look at the clock and you go, okay, am I at 9 minutes? If you are, yay. We're doing it. Keep doing the same thing. If you're a little over 9 minutes, okay, maybe I want to adjust how I'm approaching this. Maybe go a little bit faster. Maybe start skipping some questions. We'll talk about that in a second so that I can get back on track. And that's just going to reduce your stress. It's going to make sure that you're not going to get so far behind that you can't fix it. So 9 minutes per passage, that's the rule. Memorize it. So that's English. Let's actually skip to reading because math is not passage-based, but reading is. So reading is always going to divide those 40 questions between 4 passages. Always. Now, 35 divided by 4 does not come out perfectly evenly, but it's close enough to 9 minutes per passage. So on the reading section, if you spend about 9 minutes per passage, just like on English, you're going to be fine. You're going to finish the section on time. Again, technically it's like 8 point something minutes per passage, but that's like way too in depth. So you don't need to memorize any more complicated than that. 9 minutes per passage. Now, again, some passages might take a little bit longer than others. So there might be a little bit of flex there. We'll talk about that in a second, but this is the one I want you to remember. 9 minutes per passage. All right. Science, while this is 35 minutes per 40 questions, the questions are actually broken up differently in science between 6 or 7 passages. All right, so we have actually significantly more passages in science with fewer questions. So The timing here is going to depend on whether you have 6 or 7 passages. So I'm going to recommend that once you start your science section, you just peek, right? Flip to the end, go, how many passages are there? If you've got 6 passages, you're probably going to be looking at more like 6 minutes per passage. If you've got 7 passages, you're looking at exactly 5 minutes per passage. Again, you're going to finish the passage, check the clock. If you're on target, great, keep doing what you're doing. If you're not, adjust. All right? Okay, now let's jump back to math. So in math, we don't have passages as a nice little breaking point, right? But we do have really nice math. So instead of checking every question 1 minute, again, that doesn't work. Different questions take different amounts of time. We're going to treat it as 10-minute, 10-question chunks. So every 10 questions, once you finish the 10th question, look at the clock. You should be about 10 minutes in. Once you finish the 20th question, look at the clock. You should be about 20 minutes in, and so on and so forth. If you're going 5 minutes on science, how? We'll talk about that in the second half of our lesson. All right, so the last one, writing 40 minutes per one essay. It's one essay, it's 40 minutes. We're not going to break that down any further in this lesson, but in our larger live classes course, we talk about how much time to spend reading, how much time to spend planning, how much time to spend writing. So we're not going to get into that right now. But these are the numbers that you should know because they're going to help you plan your time. Okay. Let's go ahead and dig into this a little bit more now that we know our question timing checkpoints. And again, this will be posted on YouTube, the recording. So if you're going, I did not get those numbers, you can always come back. So let's talk some tips on the strategy. If you are off track when you check the clock, adjust your pace. Again, the reason that we do them semi-frequently is so we're not deep enough in the hole that we can't fix it. So if you are behind, go a little bit faster. If you are ahead, you can actually maybe take your time. If you're right on target, keep doing what you're doing. That said, when I say off track, I mean significantly off track. And significantly off track probably means like 2 minutes or more off track. If you're like a minute off, that comes out in the wash. That's no big deal. So if you were supposed to take 9 minutes and you took 10, it's fine. If you're supposed to take 10 minutes and you took 11, it's probably fine. If you took 9 when you were supposed to take 10, also probably fine. Leave it alone, keep doing what you're doing. And then if you're more behind or more off on your next checkpoint, then you can adjust. But don't hold yourself to a super rigid standard. Know how to adjust checkpoints. So if you just follow the checkpoints that are on the previous slide to the letter, to the T, that will be great and you will do awesome. But you can actually make them more refined. So for instance, math on the ACT math section is designed to get harder as you go. More complex problems, potentially stranger topics. If you're gonna find any like really long, complicated word problems, they're gonna be at the end, right? So what you probably actually wanna do is in the first 10 questions, maybe spend a little less than 10 minutes so that for like the last 10 questions, you have a little bit more than 10 minutes. So you may actually want to undershoot at the beginning and overshoot at the end. Similarly, I mentioned that reading and science passages, they differ, right? There are different types of reading passages, different types of science passages, and some of them often take longer. So for instance, on science, typically the ones with 2 different viewpoints are going to take longer than the ones with a bunch of diagrams, just because diagrams tend to go a little faster. Those questions tend to be a little bit more data-based than logic-based. So you might want to take a little bit more than 5 to 6 minutes for those more reading-based passages, a little bit less than 5 to 6 minutes for those more math and data-based passages. Same goes for the reading section. That's also going to be personal. Some people fly through things like natural science. Some people fly through things like literary narrative, and some people don't. So know yourself and know how you want to adjust your checkpoints. If you go into your test day knowing that one is a little bit weaker, maybe give yourself more time. If you go into one knowing it's a little bit stronger, maybe give yourself a little bit less time. I'm seeing a lot of comments about checking your work at the end. Checking your work is something to do if you have enough time at the end, but that's an enough time sort of thing. There are some logical checks that we can do as we go that are a really good idea. But often the thing that we want to do at the end isn't going to be check our work. We're actually going to talk about that in a couple of slides. Okay. Hey, Coach Tony. All right, let's jump into ACT scoring. So ACT scoring, English, math, reading, and science are each scored out of 36. So each scored out of 36. Those section scores are then averaged to give your total score out of 36. Now, note that this does not include the writing score or the essay score. The essay, the writing section, is scored separately out of 12. That is its own thing. Worth noting here that this means that the writing section or the essay is less important than these other sections. So probably not worth prioritizing that section over English, math, reading, and science. Probably those are going to be more important because they impact that total score. Now, that score out of 36 is based on the raw, for each section, is based on the raw number of questions you get right and wrong within the section. So it does not matter which questions you get right and wrong. So if you get a really hard question wrong, it is the exact same thing as if you get a really easy question wrong. If you spend 5 minutes on a hard question and get it right, it is exactly the same number of points as if you spend 30 seconds on an easy question and get it right. So it does not matter within a section which ones you get right and which ones you get wrong. They are all worth the same number of points. So what does that mean for us? If every question within a section is worth the same number of points, it means that running out of time on a section is the worst thing. Because if you run out of time on a section, it means that you're going to have to guess blindly at the end, or you're not going to finish that section and you're going to end up with just unanswered questions. And it's distinctly possible that those questions were things that you could have answered quickly and gotten right. And the reason that we run out of time is because we spend a ton of time on hard questions that we often just miss. So we could have saved the 5 minutes that we took on a hard question that maybe we got wrong and spread it between 5 to 10 easy questions that we could have gotten right, gotten way more points out of. So moral of the story, if you are a perfectionist, I get it. Me too. This is a habit that you're really going to want to break for this test and skip time-consuming questions. Do it. This is something that the best test takers do. So if a question is going to take you a really long time, just skip it. You can come back later, but prioritize something that is more likely to give you the points in less time. Let's talk about this. So this is one of the best ways to get back on track. So if you hit one of your checkpoints and you're going, yee, I'm not quite on time, I need to save a little bit of time. A really good move is to look at your next set of questions. And when you run into a hard question, instead of, doubling down and trying to get it done, instead, maybe just skip it. That's going to put you back on track. And it's going to give you that time back for other questions. Now, if you end up ahead of time later, you can come back to it. 100%. Great. Awesome. Skipping it does not mean that you are fully giving up on it. But it does mean that we're saying this is not worth my time right now, right? Something that's going to get me a point is worth my time right now. So the admissions committees don't care which ones you get right and which ones you get wrong. All right. So if you are skipping a question, mark it. Really important to mark it so you can come back to it later, but also mark it on your bubble sheet so you don't accidentally bubble over it. I did this on my test day. It took forever to erase my answers and rebubble. Do not be like me. Mark it and write down any progress you've made. So if you've eliminated A and D, knock them off so that you can see that if you have time to come back. Now, if you can, save a little bit of time to answer or guess at the end of the section. When I say skip, I don't mean, again, we're giving up on it, we're never coming back. We are going to at least guess, We're going to come back to that idea. But if we have a little bit of time at the end, we can come and revisit it. And often when we're revisiting, we have completely fresh eyes, right? And we're going to actually have an easier time with the question than we were when we were bogged down and really stressed about it. So next point, know which questions to skip. All right. So this is going to be potentially personal, right? If you know for a fact that there are question or passage types that take longer for you, right? You know that, I don't know, humanities takes you way longer in reading. Just skip it. Come back later. You know that the 2 passages in science take you a really long time. Just skip it. Come back to it later. Or if you know in writing that ordering sentences takes really long, skip it. Come back. If you know, and so on and so forth, right? So go ahead and go, hey, which ones do I know going in are my longer ones so that potentially you can skip on your testing. And then stay flexible. I think a lot of folks really get stressed when maybe like the first or second question in the math section is one that they're not getting or is taking way too long for them. That's okay. That's totally fine. It may just be that you're not seeing it right now, but you're not just going to manifest the ability to do the problem by staring at it and beating your head on the desk. Just skip it, come back later. It's possible that later you'll see what the question is about and it'll be easier. So don't worry about it. Even if it's something that you think you're strong on, if it's not happening, move on. It's not worth your time. Okay, so skip time-consuming questions. This is a really valuable strategy. I did it on my test day. The best test takers do it on your test day. It does not mean that you're weak or that there's something wrong. This is a powerful strategy. Okay, let's learn something else. I'm seeing a lot of commentary on reading passages. Might be right, might be wrong. We're going to talk about that in the next hour. ACT question structure. So with the exception of the writing essay, all ACT questions are multiple choice. All of them. Wow, that's great. So English, reading, and science, all of those questions are going to have 4 answer choice of which one is correct. On math, there are going to be 5 answer choices of which one is correct. Only 1 answer choice is correct, right? So what does that mean for us? Well, okay, first, something that's really important to know. There is no penalty for wrong answers on this test. There used to be on the SAT, but they got rid of that because it was a really bad idea because it punished students for guessing, right? So if you fill in a wrong answer on this test, you get 0 points. If you don't fill in an answer, you get 0 points. So what does that mean? You should always guess. Always, 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 100% of the time, you should have an answer for your questions. The absolute worst thing that can happen is you don't finish the section and you don't put answers into the questions that you missed or the questions that you skipped. Because if you bubble even randomly, on math, you have a 20% chance of getting it right. On all of the other sections, you have a 25% chance of getting it right. That is pretty good odds. And if you can use process of elimination, your odds increase. So eliminate as many answer choices as possible, even if it's only 1. If you eliminate 1 answer choice on math, you're down to 4 answer choices and a 25% chance of guessing right. If you eliminate 1 answer choice on any of the other sections, you're down to 3 answer choices and a 33.3333 chance of guessing right. So process of elimination is powerful, really, really cool. Do it. Now, you should save guessing for the end of the section. Now, there are ways to solve with process of elimination, and that's something that we do really frequently in math, as well as in English. And we're not going to talk about that today. Actually, we'll talk about it a little bit today. But if you are guessing, as in you're not entirely sure what answer it is, if you've done process of elimination down to 1 answer, great, bubble it in. But if you're going, I'm not sure which one it is, and I'm guessing, maybe between 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. Do that at the end. Circle it, come back later. Because if you're bubbling in and then you do end up with time, and then you have to come back and erase it and start over, it's kind of a nightmare. So save that guessing process for the end of the section. Now, when you are going, okay, I'm bubbling in, I'm guessing, right? Sometimes we have to guess blindly, and that's okay. But if we have a little bit of time, think about the answer choices logically. All right. So for instance, in math, we might be going, which ones can't be correct? So we might be going, okay, this answer choice is too big, or this answer choice doesn't have a square root, and I'm pretty sure it should have a square root, or I'm pretty sure this should be in thirds instead of in fourths. So we can rule out answer choices that just don't make sense. Similarly, in the English section, you might go, there is definitely not a semicolon. Okay, great. And that can help us rule out some answers and narrow down. Now, this one's kind of weird, so stay with me. When in doubt, pick the boring answer. This one is particularly useful for reading, occasionally useful for English. But it's based on the principle that this test is boring. It is specifically designed to be boring, which means that the correct answers are often boring. We'll come back to that in just a second. Now, I want to do a couple of problems together to demonstrate the power of process of elimination. Okay, let's start with a math problem, and this is a Magoosh math problem. So reading this together, in the Interis Corporation, 3/7 of the managers are female. If there are 42 female managers, how many managers in total are there? And I'm going to hopefully, let me go back to sharing my screen. That was an accident. All right, we should be back in just a second. Okay, there we go. All right, I'm trying to figure out how to annotate. Now, if you're going, hey, should I be doing algebra here? No, you do not need to be doing algebra here. Now you can, you absolutely can. But if you're going, okay, do I do 3/7 of 42? Do I do 3/7 of something and then that equals 42? If you're not entirely sure how to fit these pieces of information together, don't worry, because you don't need to be. All right, let me see if I can figure out how to annotate really quickly. This is not normally what I use for these classes. Okay, we're good. All right, so we're looking for the total number of managers. Excellent. So, all right, let's think about this logically to do some process of elimination. So I'm noticing that my answers are pretty different, which is exciting. I might be able to eliminate just based on logic. So we go, okay, I'm looking for my total number of managers. So I'm just going to make this bar that maybe represents total number of managers. And I know that 3/7 of the managers are female. Okay, so what does that mean about the not female managers? In the chat. If we know that the female managers are 3/7, what does that mean about the not female managers? All right, Gracie, Molly, Protote Gaming, exciting. Kiki, Emily, Shelby. Oh, Emily's a little bit ahead. Whitney, Neha, Joshua. Okay, a lot of folks coming in going, hey, there are 4/7 in order to add up to 1 of the managers that are not female. Okay, well, let's take this where Emily was going, right? So we're going, hey, there are 42 female managers, and that's 3/7. Well, not female is 4/7, which is more, which means that not female is more than 42, which means our total number of managers, if we add that up, is 42 plus more than 42, which means our total number of managers is more than 84, which means not A, not B, not C, not D, E. Wow. So if you did the algebra, that is totally fine and it totally works provided you set it up correctly. A lot of folks don't set this one up correctly and end up with the wrong answer, or they end up spending more time than they should with the algebra. This is something that if you were really, really comfortable with this sort of logic, you could do in 10 seconds. 10 seconds. So this is the power of logical process of elimination. Often it eliminates the need to do math or the need to actually solve by eliminating other answer choices. Okay, let's go ahead and try another one. Okay, so this one right here is a reading question. The author of this passage most likely believes that Ginsberg's work is... Okay, now you might be going, we haven't read the passage. Erika, how am I supposed to do this? You haven't given me the passage. That's true. I have not, but we can still do it. Now, this is not how I would recommend doing it on test day, but I just want to demonstrate. So let's think about this idea that the ACT is boring, right? So on the last one, we did logical reasoning. Here we're doing the ACT is boring. Which answer do you think is the most boring? And again, let's think about what boring means in context of the ACT. It's not going to be too strong, either way too strongly positive or way too strongly negative. It's usually kind of in the neutral zone, maybe a little positive, maybe a little negative. Typically going to be something that maybe you would say in a professional context, you know, something that isn't going to be super rude or super casual. Which one is the most boring? I'm seeing a lot of really good answers. Yep, it's worthwhile. It's C. Really great work, folks. So we take a look at the answer choices and, oops, let me, sorry, having some trouble with my annotation here. Okay. So if we take a look, oh my gosh, what is going on? All right, I'm not going to annotate. If we take a look at these other answer choices and we go, okay, we've got shoddy. When we think of the way the word shoddy works, right? If I think of using the word shoddy, I think of like, if you're like cleaning the house for someone who's like very particular and like they run their finger on a shelf and there's dust on it, this is shoddy work. They'd be upset about it, right? If I think shoddy, I think someone's being mean to me if they're saying that. That's not what this test does. This test isn't mean. It's not shady. That's not what this is. Trifling. All right. Trifling, I think of like a really high-powered like business person. And you bring them something where you're going, Josh, thought it was shoddy. That's very funny. If you are talking to a very important, powerful person, right? And you bring them something that's not very important. They might go, this is trifling. Don't bother me with this. This isn't important. It's not worth my time. Okay, so that's really negative. And again, I would think of it in a rude context, not what this test does. Okay, skipping to futile. So if worthwhile means it's worth your while, futile means not worthwhile at all, totally pointless. So don't do this, it's futile, it's not going to have the result that you want. You can do it if you want, but there's no reason to, it's pointless. Okay, that's getting a little heavy, maybe a little more heavy than this test would go. Of the 3 wrong answers, it's probably the best. But when I look at worthwhile, that is just so like neutral positive, right? It's fine. It's going, oh yeah, maybe this isn't the best thing in the entire world, but it's worth time. Maybe it's worth consideration. It's worthwhile. So it's like slightly positive, which is exactly where this test likes to hang out. So the answer here is worthwhile. And we answered this even without the passage, right? So pick the boring answer, and logical reasoning can help us get through these answer choices fast. Process of elimination. All right. So study strategies. And this is the last thing we're going to do before we take a break, and we will do some Q&A. So study strategies, be consistent. A lot of folks really want to cram for their test, right? Does anyone have cramming tendencies in the chat? Sorry to distract from Addison Ray. Does anyone have cramming tendencies? So maybe don't study enough. Maybe stay up all night before a test. Maybe you've written an essay at 5 a.m. Not speaking from experience here. I am speaking from experience. This is not the place to do that, because this is not a good study habit. We all know this, but it's actually really not. So being consistent, studying multiple times a week, and making sure those study sessions are a reasonable duration, right? We don't want to be studying for like 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours, because by the end of it, our brains are fried and they're not working right. And we're making mistakes that we shouldn't be making. And when we're making mistakes that we shouldn't be making, we're building bad habits. So make sure that you're doing multiple study sessions per week that aren't too long. That's going to help your brain make connections from the previous study. You're going to be able to actually remember that so that you can do better than you did or build on something that you've learned. So being consistent. Now, if you struggle with consistency, something like a course, right? Like our ACT Live classes or a study schedule, we actually have study schedules for our online program at Magoosh, or even something that you make up yourself just to build it out. That can really, really help with this. At the very least, I recommend putting when you're going to study on the calendar, because if you don't put it on the calendar, it ends up getting pushed off, right? If it's not on the calendar, it's not a priority. So plan in advance when you're going to study and then stick to it. All right, so be consistent. Now, part of this is taking realistic practice tests. A lot of people don't want to take a practice test because they go, I'm not done studying, right? It's going to be a waste. There are things I'm going to get wrong because I haven't practiced this yet. Or they're just going, hey, this is a really big commitment. Practice tests take a lot of time. And I'm here to tell you that taking the practice test on its own is valuable, right? The experience of sitting down and spending that much time on the test, the experience of being timed is going to be important, is going to be something that you need to practice before you get to test day so you're not surprised. But also, it's an opportunity to see what you're getting wrong on an actual exam, what you're struggling with, so that you can practice it in your study. So practice tests are actually incredible and super, super important. Now, I recommend taking practice tests every 2 to 4 weeks. So if your test date is close, I recommend maybe every 2 weeks, right? There are a ton of practice tests out there. There are 8, 10 official ones available from College Board, or you can access them through Khan Academy. Those are free and official and really, really awesome. There are more at different test prep companies. So at Magoosh, we have the option to build up to like 4 practice tests in addition to a paper practice test. So there are a bunch out there. You're probably not going to run out unless you're taking it more frequently than this, which I do not recommend. Don't do that, because if you're taking practice tests more frequently than that, you're likely going to burn out. You're likely going to make the same mistakes over and over again, build bad habits. You're not going to have enough time to learn between your practice tests. Now, if you've got a longer timeline, you might be able to spread that out a little more, like every 3 weeks, every 4 weeks. But my big recommendation is start with a practice test so you know what you're working on, and then end with a practice test about a week before your test date. And that last week is going to be focused on building strategy, reviewing, positive visualization, all of that good stuff, sleeping, eating, making sure that you're ready to go mentally for your exam. Prioritize weaknesses and learn from your mistakes. So I've mentioned making the same mistake over and over again as a really bad thing, as a way to build bad habits. And that's because I really, really mean it. This is something that I see so frequently, where students just drill and 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 learn nothing. So they come to me and they say, I've done 1,000 practice questions and my score hasn't improved. Why? It's because they're not focusing on their mistakes and deciding that once they make a mistake, they are going to dive deep and figure out how to never make that mistake again, ever. So I don't want you to be doing 1,000 practice questions and not getting anything out of it. I want you to get something out of every single question. I want you to get as much as you can out of that question. So learn from your mistakes. When you make a mistake, dig into it. Figure out, okay, what did I do wrong? Why did I do that? How can I recognize that in a different problem? And how can I fix it so that I don't miss the next one? So this is the idea of quality over quantity. Doing more questions is typically not the move. Do fewer questions and get more out of it. If you do 10 questions and really learn from them, it's more value than doing 100 questions and then just being done. All right, so quality over quantity. And then the last thing that I want to mention here is to seek out expert help if you need it. Now, you can do quality over quantity study on your own. There's a ton of free resources on the internet. At Magoosh, we've got our blog, we've got our YouTube channel, we got a ton of stuff out there, and there's a ton of stuff out there from, I said College Board earlier. That's the SAT. I'm talking about the ACT. I apologize for that. Rewind. On the ACT, there are like 6, I think, official practice tests out there that are close enough to the current exam that you can take and ignore Khan Academy there. So apologies, I said the wrong thing, but there are still several official exams out there for the ACT. Coming back to this, seek out expert help if you need it. There is plenty of good stuff from the ACT company, as well as from other test prep companies out there like Magoosh. We still have a blog for the ACT. We have our YouTube channel. There's a lot of free stuff out there. There's forums. There are places where you can get help for free and on your own. But if you're going, hey, I need expert help and I need something that's going to be more catered to me, something like a class or a tutor or an online program written by experts might be the move for you. So seek out expert help if you need it, whether that is online for free or from a professional. Okay. And that is it for the first half of our class. So we are going to take a break. And during this break, I'm going to answer questions. So I'm not taking a break, but if you would like to take a break, we're going to break until about 5 p.m. Pacific. And then we'll come back for our passage strategies for ACT reading and ACT science. Another plug here for this code, 20% off of live classes. Discount code live 2021. And again, a reminder at the end, we are doing a raffle for a free live class. But if you would like to stick around for the next 12 minutes, throw questions in the chat and I will answer as many of them as I can. If you're not sticking around, see you in 12 minutes. Okay. Oh, we got a question. Is this just for strategies? It's going to be pretty strategic. In fact, I think that most good test prep is pretty strategic. So when we're talking about passage strategies, we're going to talk through the strategies, but we are going to implement them for a reading passage. So we are going to be doing that together. What is the best way to learn the math concepts that are in the math test, Indu? What is the best way to learn the math concepts that are in the math test? I'm trying to make sure my answer is really thorough. So the biggest thing that I would say is the thing that I was mentioning on the previous slide, which is to learn from your mistakes. So first, you're going to make sure that you have practice material, right? Practice tests can be really good. An online program potentially like Magoosh can be really good. But as you're going through the questions, going, hey, what am I struggling with? What am I making mistakes with? And then digging into those. That's going to be the best way, is to learn from your mistakes. Now, if you're finding that you are really struggling, you're having a hard time learning from your mistakes, or maybe there are things that you need a refresher on, or you really don't understand how the test asks it, something like an online program or a live class might be the best way to learn it. A book is also a great way for a lot of students. You got to be pretty self-motivated. But yeah, typically that's something I recommend. So you can do it by just seeking out resources where you can get it on the internet, by going through those problems, seeing what you're struggling with, and then finding what you need. But if you want something that's a little bit more like all-inclusive, I would recommend a program, maybe like Magoosh's online program, or a class like Magoosh's live classes. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. Please tell me how to do 5 minutes for science. So we are going to be talking about the passage strategy that is going to help us get through it fast later in this lesson. So don't worry, we are coming to that. But yeah, the timing is efficient on science. One thing that I would note is that if you, after implementing the strategy, are still really, really struggling, figure out what your goal score is and figure out if you can just fully skip a passage, because that's a strategy that actually works for a lot of students. If you're not aiming for like a super high science score, you can get away with skipping a passage and still get a really good score. And that can reduce the stress on the section. I would recommend, if you're going to skip one, skipping the 2 passage one, or just save that one for the end. Because again, it's the hardest one to get through and typically the one that a lot of students miss points on. Yeah, skip is going to be one of the big strategies, but we'll talk about how to get through the passage efficiently. A lot of people waste time on those passages. You don't have to. Okay, what else have we got? Coach Tony. Let's see. I have a week left to study and I have been inconsistent. Any last minute tips? Big tip, Aaliyah, make a strategy guide. So get a piece of paper, divide it between the sections on the test, and for each section, write down your big strategies. Not the big things to remember, but the big strategies. Now, a way I recommend doing this is as a prompt response. So when I see this, I do this. So for, what's a good one? When I see a math problem, I need to circle what the question is asking for. Or more specifically, when I see exponents, I should take my bases down to primes. Or in a reading vocabulary question, when I see a reading vocabulary question, I should, what should I do? I should figure out what I would put in the blank before I look at the answer choices. Or when I see a colon, I need to remember to look for an independent clause before it, things like that. Those sorts of strategies, write them all down on a piece of paper and then just review them over the course of the week. Don't cram, maybe do some problems here and there. Maybe this weekend, do a practice test. That would be really valuable, and then review it, review your mistakes. But that last week, review your strategies, sleep, and then take your test. I find that a lot of cramming in the last week is not particularly beneficial, but take a practice test this weekend, really review it, learn from your mistakes, make your strategy guide, review, do some questions here and there. Hope that helps. Great question from Joseph. How long days and weeks are the online classes? So ACT classes are Mondays and Wednesdays. They're at a couple of different times, but they're 2 hours per class, kind of like this one. And there are 8 classes. So that's 4 weeks, 2 classes a week, 2 hours a class. So 16 hours of live instruction total. I find that's a nice length. It's not too much test, but it's enough to be able to get through pretty much everything on the test. There are a couple of things that we don't really touch because, like example, matrices. We do them in the homework, but we don't do them in class because they would take like 45 minutes to teach and they don't show up on every single test. And when they do show up, they show up once. So it's just not worth the time. But yeah, we cover pretty much, I'd say like 95% of what's on the ACT. We also do SAT. It's the same length, but we just do it on Tuesdays and Thursdays. If you want to look at the schedule, you can go to our website and you can see the ones that are available. Grace says, what should I do if I haven't learned some of the math yet? So I was kind of hinting at that with my previous answer, but it depends on what the math is. So if you're going like, I really haven't spent a lot of time with trig, there isn't a lot of trig on this exam. And the trig that is on this exam is SOHCAHTOA. So if that's a familiar term, then you're gonna be fine with the trig on this exam. Similarly, if you're going, I don't know matrices, probably don't bother with it. I'm gonna be honest, because it's just so much study for very, very few points, if any points at all. Now, if you're already a high scorer and you have the time for it, go for it. But prioritize the stuff that's going to show up more. Typically, the stuff that's going to show up more is the stuff you spent more time on in your math classes in school. So stuff like arithmetic, algebra, coordinate geometry, regular geometry, they'll do like a little bit of stuff like complex numbers, but again, not a ton. So if you haven't learned some of it yet, if you have time and you're already performing well enough on the stuff that you know, sure, go for it. Maybe seek out resources, either free or paid. But if you're really close to your test day, skip it is my big recommendation. Come back and guess later. Okay. Last minute tips, I kind of hit that. Make a strategy guide is my big one. And if you have more than a week until your test, take a last practice test, full length, do the whole experience. But strategy guide is the big one. Yeah, that's the big one. Also, visualize success. That sounds really hokey. And I don't mean like I get into my dream school and then I make 6 figures and then I'm blah, blah, blah. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about visualizing using your strategies on test day. Just that process of like running it through your head and like imagining yourself doing it makes it easier to do it on test day so that your strategies don't just like fly out the window the second the clock starts. So imagine taking the test and doing it right. By practice test, great question, Allie Maples. Is that individual practice test like just math or the whole ACT? The whole thing. Mostly because the whole thing is an experience, right? It's exhausting and really, really long, and there's endurance and there's stress and there's time management. And we want to have that experience enough times before we go into our test day. So I recommend doing the whole thing. Sometimes I find when students take individual sections, they're not prepared for the whole thing and just the endurance that goes with it. And I can find that it inflates scores. So you might do better on the science section when you're fresh, but maybe not when you've already done 3 sections. So we just want to be prepared for that. Okay, do I have any must-know tips for the math section? Ooh, what are my must-know tips? I mean, the biggest ones are skip. Skip. It gets more difficult over the section for the most part. Oh, here's a really good one. Circle the thing that the question is asking you to solve for and go back to it before you pick your answer. The test maker builds in trap answers. I know this because I've written the questions and I've analyzed a ton of official ones. The answers are not there randomly. They are traps. So if the question is asking for X and there's a Y in the question, Y is going to be an answer. If it's asking for X squared, X is going to be an answer. If it's asking for one angle, the other angle is going to be an answer. If you're supposed to multiply, like dividing is going to be an answer. You know, the sorts of classic traps that you would fall into. So go back, hey, did I solve for the right thing before you pick your answer? And that's one of my big ones. Yeah, that's a must-know tip. Hopefully I hit the tips for the last week. Ooh, any quick tips for the English section? What are my quick tips? First thing I would say, prioritize learning the grammar rules that are on this test. There are a ton of free blog articles about it. Alternatively, a program like Magoosh or our live classes go over all of the ones you need to know. Those are going to be typically the quicker wins. Prioritize those and maybe skip some of the more complicated ones, like so ones with question stems, the longer ones, maybe skip those because those typically take longer and they are maybe a little harder. Prioritize getting those grammar rules locked in so that those can go fast and just get you quick points. Science, how do I ace data interpretation? I struggle with it. I feel you on that. I really do. Couple of things. If you're solving for like a specific point, put your finger on the graph or on the table on those pieces of information and just go one at a time. So it goes, okay, day 7. Okay, drug B. Okay, drug B. Okay, at whatever. Okay, and then touch the data points one at a time until you get to the answer. If you try to process all of it at once, you're really going to have a hard time and you're going to likely pick one of the trap answers they've built in. So that's one of the big ones. 2, when you're going through the passage, those diagrams, just looking for trends is going to be the biggest thing. So before you even get to the questions, go, is this going up? Is this going down? Is there no trend? Is there anything weird, like an outlier? That's going to be something really, really useful. We're actually going to kind of touch on that in just a second. Okay. All right, I am out of time for these questions. So if you have additional questions, you can ask those again at the end of our live stream. I'll stick around to answer those, but we're gonna go ahead and talk about passages. Okay, ACT passage strategy. So as we learned on the reading section, we have 9 minutes per passage. And on the science section, we have 5 to 6 minutes per question, or sorry, per passage. That's tight on time. And worth noting that that includes the questions. It's not just getting through the passage, it's getting through the questions. So that means that that 9 minutes is for the passage and 10 questions. And for science, those 5 to 6 minutes are for the passage and 5 to 7 questions. So how the heck do we do that? How do we get through that in a reasonable amount of time? And how do we get through that in this time and get the questions right? Right? Because we can maybe get through it in the time and get the questions wrong, but how do we get through it in the time and get the score that we want? So I normally do this as a poll in my classes, but I don't know how to set one of those up on YouTube. So I'm going to ask you in the chat to tell me what you do. Now, there might be a right answer, maybe, but I want to know what you personally do. How do you approach ACT reading and science passages? Do you A, read every sentence, B, skim, C, it's a sipping. It's just a skipping straight to the questions and then coming back to the passage? Or do you D, do something else? And you can just put the letter in there if you'd like. And be honest, what do you do? I know there's a typo. I know. I blew it. Professionalism out the window. All right, let's see. Okay. Skip straight to the questions. Depends on the passage length. Okay. Oh, I'm seeing a passage glance. Okay. I try to do A, but do worse than B. B and C mixed together. It was an engagement tactic. That's nice, Tony. Okay, C is the worst for me. I find it useless when I want to solve. Okay, and we're getting, okay, which one's the right one? Okay, so there are several ways to do this, and I want to talk through each of them. So I'm going to talk through kind of our polar opposites first. So let's start with reading every sentence. Reading every sentence, I see a lot of people do this, and that's because it's kind of the default, right? If we are, if we're reading something for school or for life, we're typically going to read every sentence because we want to get the information, right? We want to get all the details. We want to really, truly understand it, right? But that can get us in trouble here for a couple of reasons. So one, it takes a really long time, especially because these passages are designed to be complicated, right? They're designed to be boring, but they're designed to also be about stuff that makes us struggle and have sentences in it that we go, what? And then we reread 5 times to understand, right? And this is particularly dangerous because there aren't that many questions per passage. There's 10, which means that they can't ask about every single little thing in the passage. So maybe that thing that we reread 5 times doesn't even come up in the questions. Ugh. And maybe because we spent so much time on that one sentence, we actually missed the bigger picture of the passage. And so when the question is like, what's this passage about? We're like, I don't know, but I know what that one sentence means. So one, we can run out of time. And 2, we can actually miss questions because we miss the forest for the trees. So maybe not this one. And if this is you, that's okay. This is the default. I'm going to ask you to come with me on a journey, explore some new options here. All right. Leap of faith. All right. I'm going to skip to sipping straight to the questions, otherwise known as skipping straight to the questions, which is kind of the opposite. So that's where folks go, I'm not going to read every sentence. I know that that's a trap. I know that I don't have to get all this information. I only have to get the information in the questions, right? And that seems like a really good idea. However, And this strategy shows up a weird amount, like on the internet and a lot of test prep advice, but I don't recommend it because when we skip straight to the questions and it goes, okay, let me ask about something specific, we have no idea where it is in the passage. No clue, because we haven't read the passage. So then we end up kind of reading the whole thing anyway. Or when they ask, what's the passage about as a whole? I don't know. I had no idea. So we end up reading the whole passage, or we end up missing the question. So skipping straight to the questions, one, takes a weird amount of time because we end up rereading a bunch of stuff, and two, often causes us to miss the questions because, again, the answers are loaded with traps, right? They're loaded with other things in the passage or things that seem like they should be true. And if we're not sure where to look or have the bigger ideas, we're more likely to fall for those traps. So I don't recommend that. Let's talk about skimming. And actually, before we do that, glancing at the passage, it depends on what that means by glancing, because glancing could mean like just looking at it, which is probably not a great idea, but it could mean skimming. And I want to talk about what skimming means, because skimming can mean reading every single word really, really fast, and that's a really bad idea. That's just reading every sentence, but badly. Skimming actually means something else. So if reading every sentence is bad and skipping straight to the questions is bad, what do? We go in between with a skim. So if you picked B, you're right, but I want to talk about why skimming is the best strategy. And again, if you picked something else, that's okay. I want you to explore this option with me. So what does skimming mean? It does not mean read every word, every sentence really, really, really fast. That is a bad idea. That's not helpful. You're not going to retain it. And actually it doesn't. Olivia, when I skim, I don't retain everything. It's probably because you're reading every sentence really quickly. That's not what I mean. What I mean when I say skim is to read the important sentences and skip the rest. Now, this is uncomfortable for a lot of students because they go, what if there's something important in the sentences that I skip? Well, one, we're going to learn the clues for which sentences are going to be the most important. And if there is something important, we can always come back. So how do we know what sentences are important? Let's explore. Okay, let me take that away. Great question, Miriam. How do I know the important sentences? Let's talk about it. Okay, if I were to assign an essay for you to write, all right, and then I didn't want to read it, but I wanted to get the gist of what your essay was about, which paragraphs would you tell me to read? Which paragraphs are going to give me the gist of your essay if I don't want to read the rest? In the chat. I've taught this class a lot. Yeah, I know what's coming. So what paragraphs would you tell me to read if I didn't want to read the whole thing? Okay, thesis, intro and conclusion, intro, paragraph 1 and last one, and conclusion, first and last, intro, first and final, intro for sure. Yes, first and last. If you have like no time, you have somehow gotten a little off track with your checkpoints and you are really, really low on time, read the first and the last paragraph. This is especially important on the reading section, as well as on the 2-paragraph guys on science. If you have a paragraph structure, the first and the last ones are going to be the ones that give you the big ideas. Prioritize that. But what if I want to get the big idea of a paragraph? What sentences should I read? So say maybe I am going to take a look at the body paragraphs. What sentences are going to be the ones that tell me what's going on in that paragraph? In the chat. What do we think? Yeah, it's the same thing. It's first and last, and particularly first, right? The first sentence is, in most cases, going to say, this is what's happening in the paragraph. This is what you can expect. Oftentimes the last sentence is important because it's often a conclusion, but not always, right? So first and last, if you just read the first paragraph and the last paragraph and the first and last of all the body paragraphs, you're going to have a really good idea for what's going on in your passage as a whole and what each paragraph is doing. So if you have a question that's like, hey, what's this paragraph doing? You know. If you have a question that's like, hey, here's a detail, well, you know what's going on in each paragraph, so you can look. All right. And again, I don't recommend just reading the first and last paragraph. If you have time, there's more to it. Okay, so let's say I want to read more of the body paragraphs or more of the first and last paragraphs, right? And I want to figure out which sentences other than the first and the last are going to be important. There's a type of word, and most students don't get this one, but I want to try it. What type of word do you think is going to signal that a sentence is important? And it's often, here's a hint, at the beginning of a sentence. Gabrielle, I get the FOMO. I get that this is scary. We're going to try it together, and hopefully it reduces the fear. All right, a lot of people are saying the. That is a common beginning to sentences, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's important. Grace has got it. Whitney's got an example. Neha's got an example. Catherine's got an example. Joss has got an example. Transition words. And particularly contrast and conclusion transition words. Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about it. I'm seeing a lot of however. However is a classic contrast word. So let me give an example. You know, if someone's doing a bad apology and they say, I'm sorry, but you know they didn't really mean the I'm sorry. It's the thing that comes after the but that's most important. It's the same way in ACT passages. Anything that comes after a however or a but or an in contrast is going to be particularly important. You should probably read that sentence. Similarly, conclusion, right? If you have therefore, thus, as a result, especially if it's in a last sentence, that's the point. That's what the paragraph was leading up to. You should give that a read. Now we'll come back to why I didn't mention other types of transition words in just a second. Another thing that you're going to want to look out for, is tone. So like I mentioned, this test is for the most part pretty boring, right? So when it gets a little spicy, we want to start paying attention. So if this test is like, this is incredible, this is devastating, this is worthwhile, this is futile. Ooh, okay. We want to pay attention to tone words. So if there's anything that says, I'm important because I have a feeling, we want to just note that. Who feels that? What do they feel it about? Maybe we don't read the whole sentence, but we're going to clock it because that'll inform how the passage feels and how that paragraph feels. Shoddy, exactly. So one thing that we're not going to read is detail and continuation. And that's why I didn't say just transition words, because there are certain transition words that actually say, do not read me. I'm not important. So for example, if you see a for example, in, again, 95% of cases, you should not read that because you already know what it's an example of. A for example gives more information. Do not read it. Similarly, continuation. If you see an also, it's more information about something you already know. Don't read it. If you see first, second, third, fourth, it is a list about something you already know. Don't read it. Furthermore, moreover, in addition, don't read it. Yeah, moreover, skip, skip, skip. Oh, great question from Olivia. When the passage has a spicy tone, should we pick the spicy answer or the boring answer? So that's going to depend a little bit on the question. The pick the boring answer thing is something that's a good desperation move. But oftentimes when the passage is being a little bit spicy, right? So maybe the passage is like, this is a bad idea, or like this needs more attention. We wouldn't pick something like this is a life-alteringly, world-shatteringly terrible thing. Okay, that would be too extreme. We'd want to go negative, but a little boring negative. Does that make sense? So there is usually maybe a little bit of tone, but it usually doesn't go too far in either direction. Hopefully that helps. That's a really great clarifying question. So first and last, love it. Contrast and conclusion, love it. Tone, love it. Detail and continuation, don't love it. What if we don't have any of the above? Don't read it. Skip it. Now, if you miss something, you can always come back later. And we're not going to pick up on every single detail because we can come back for it, right? When we get to the question and find out it's important. Now, if you follow these rules exactly, you're going to do really great. Now, there's a little bit of follow your heart here, which you'll get better at as you do this more, but these rules are going to help you prioritize the important stuff that the questions are actually going to ask about. Okay, let's do another strategy. Summarize as you go. All right, so when I have skimmed my first paragraph, I'm going to stop and I'm going to go, whoa, what was that about? Question for you in the chat. Have you ever read a page, or at least you must have read the page because your eyes made it from the top to the bottom. But when you look up, you go, I have no idea what I just read. I have literally no clue. It like went in one ear and out the other, or like went in one eye and out the other. Just have no idea what that was about. I must have just been zoned out. Has that happened to you? Yeah, okay. I'm seeing a lot of folks. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so this has happened to me as well. In fact, this happens to me a lot. A lot, especially if you are tired, right? Which you might be on a test like the ACT. So summarizing as you go is going to be particularly important to making sure you don't zone out, but also to make sure that you actually know what's happening in the passage, that you're actually implementing the strategies. So let's talk about how we do this. Summarize in chunks. So on the reading section, your chunks are typically going to be paragraphs. So you'll stop at the end of each paragraph and you'll go, what the heck was that about? What are the big ideas? And you're going to summarize it. On the science section, it might be paragraphs, it might be a diagram. So you might be going, okay, what's the overall trend of this diagram? What are the big things that should stick out to me about this diagram? Maybe temperature goes up while latitude goes down or whatever. I don't know. Does that even make sense? Who knows? But we're going to summarize for each of those little chunks again, so that we're making sure that we're not just breezing through it, that we understand it, but also so that we have a reference. So I really am going to recommend to you that you jot down your summaries as you go. So if you have a paragraph, jot down your summary in the margin next to it. If you have a diagram, maybe you could even summarize on the diagram. And that's just gonna make sure, one, that you actually do it, right? I know that often I think I'm doing something, but I'm not really doing it. Jotting it down keeps you honest. But two, it's gonna give you a reference. So if you are going through the questions and you're going, what is paragraph? What's the main purpose of paragraph 4? Look at your summary for paragraph 4. That's the answer. Amazing. If you're going, okay, this is about a certain detail. Where is that detail? Look at your summaries. That'll tell you where the detail is. Incredible. Now, if you have a steel trap mind, you don't technically need to do this. I recommend trying it first and then trying it without and then going, okay, did it go worse? And be really honest with yourself. Some people don't need it, but I recommend trying it first, getting in the habit. All right, so we're gonna jot it down in the margins. Now, because we're writing this down and because summaries should focus on high level ideas, keep your summaries less than or equal to 5 words. Now, if you're going, that's not enough, I can't fit in everything, you're not supposed to. Again, it's just for the big ideas. So keep your summaries short and sweet. So we want to focus on the big ideas, on the structure and the tone. I've got a question. Will jotting down my thoughts waste time? Not if they're 5 words or less, and if it actually helps you with the questions. So a lot of folks go, I don't want to do this. And question strategy hint, they don't want to predict their answers. It actually saves you time in the long run because you don't have to go back and go hunting, or you don't get distracted by wrong answer choices with predicting. So a lot of strategies seem like they're going to waste time. They are not, because they are designed to help you not get lost in your own brain. So does not waste time. So focus on big ideas, structure, and tone in your summaries. That's how you can keep them short and make sure that they actually get at the big ideas of that paragraph or that diagram. So we're not gonna, like, for a diagram, list every single point, right? Don't care. We're gonna list trends and any outliers. For a paragraph, we're gonna probably focus on what's in the first sentence, and if there's any powerful transitions or powerful tone, note those as well. So let's do some examples. So this would be an incredible summary of like a first paragraph for a science passage. Global warming, frowny face, but solution. So let's walk through this. This would be a paragraph that introduces global warming, talks about why it's bad, but then we get a however, and they introduce the idea that perhaps there could be a solution to global warming. From this summary alone, I can tell what's coming next. It's probably a discussion of the solution. And I know if I have a question that's about why global warming sucks, it's going to be in the first half of the paragraph. So I have a lot of information from this summary. So this would be a summary for a jam-packed, important paragraph. This would be a summary for a less jam-packed, less important paragraph. Exp methods or experimental methods. So this would be a summary for maybe a paragraph that's like, first we set up the test tubes, and then second we titrated the blah, 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 right? Okay, I don't care. None of that's important. That's probably a paragraph that I read like half a sentence of and then just said, great, it's the methods. Because it wasn't important enough to read much of, it's not important enough to get a very long summary. So if we have a question that asks about the experimental methods, I know where it is and then I can hunt it down, but the summary doesn't deserve more than that. Another example, this would be a really great summary for a diagram in the science section. So maybe we see a trend line that goes boop, 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 boop. We go, okay, so I see that that is temperature in the x-axis and saturation in the y-axis. So my big summary is saturation goes up as temp goes up. Great. Again, I'm not gonna note all of the little points, all of the little details. If there's two trend lines and they both do the same thing, I'll note that. But again, it's just gonna get the overall trends. Okay, so those are our summaries. Now, the last thing that I wanna talk about, I know this is a lot of strategies, we're about to implement them, is to keyword skim for specific questions. And we're not actually going to do this in today's class because we're focused on the passage. But I want to show you this one because it is an example of why you don't have to know every single thing from the passage. You don't have to get every single sentence in your brain. So let's talk about how we answer specific questions. So if we've got a general question, what's the passage about? What's the purpose of this paragraph? How does the author feel about blah? We can typically just answer those based on our skim, based on our summaries, right? We don't have to go back to the passage, but if they ask us about something specific, usually we will have to go back to the passage. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna look at the question stem and we're gonna find the weirdest word, the weirdest word. So what does that mean? Well, if we've got a passage about dinosaurs, right? The word dinosaur is probably not going to be very helpful, right? But maybe the word petroleum, that's going to be a helpful word. So the word dinosaur is probably going to show up everywhere because that's the big idea. But petroleum might show up in like one paragraph, might show up in one of your summaries, or it might not show up at all because it's a detail. So we're going to find the weirdest, most specific word in the question. And again, when I say weird word, I don't mean a word that you perceive as weird, like moist. I mean a word that is weird compared to the passage. So something that is not going to show up all over the passage. All right. So then what we're going to do is we're going to look at your summaries. So we're going to go, okay, that weird word, looking at my summaries, which summary is that weird word most related to? So if I see petroleum in one of my summaries, I'm going to go, that is the paragraph where I'm going to find my answer. Now, if I go, hey, I don't see petroleum in any of my summaries, maybe I see something like natural resources or oil or something that is vaguely related to petroleum. And I go, okay, cool. That's probably where I'm going to be looking. So I'm not going to have to hunt through the whole thing. I'm going to hunt just in that paragraph. Now then, that's where I'm going to actually look for the word. And this is kind of a weird one, so bear with me. I'm not going to read. I'm going to look for the shape of the word. So I want you to picture the word petroleum, right? And let me see if it'll let me annotate. It might. Let's see. Petroleum. It's a little bit small, but maybe you can see that on the screen. Can we see that? Okay, petroleum. Now let me see if I can make it bigger. I can't. Okay, so noticing this word petroleum, right? If we have this word, we might go, okay, I see that that P sticks down. Okay, that's a shape of the word. I see that that T sticks up. That's a shape. I see that the L sticks up, and then I see it ends with that weird little lumpy M. I also see that it's kind of a long word. So instead of reading, right? Reading and going, okay, do I read the word petroleum? I'm going to look for a word about this long that starts with a sticking down, sticks up a couple of times, and then ends with some lumps. And then that's going to help me find that word petroleum way faster than if I just reread the whole paragraph. Does that make sense? That idea of looking for the shape of the word. So we're going to hunt down the shape of the word that we want, and then based on that, we're going to answer the question. Now, if it doesn't actually say the word petroleum, that would be really weird. But if it didn't actually say that word, then we would have to maybe get clever, look for synonyms, blah, blah, blah. But this is going to help us narrow in really, really close to the actual sentence that's going to have our answer in it. And that's going to help us predict. We're not really going to talk about that idea today, but it's going to help us come up with our own answer so that we can get through the wrong answer traps really, really fast. Okay. So is it long? Is it short? Which letters stick up or stick down? Okay. Now that we've done those strategies, and let me see if I can delete the word petroleum now. Can I? I can. Amazing. Okay. Let's go ahead and try this together. Okay, we are going to try this on a reading passage. So we're going to try to implement our strategies on a passage from a Magoosh practice test. So this is a humanities passage. This is a passage type that shows up in every single ACT exam and that a lot of students struggle with. It's actually my least favorite passage type on ACT reading, but we're going to use our strategies to read like a fourth of this passage and have totally enough information to go into the questions. Okay. So let's go ahead and give this a go. And I want to give this first paragraph a read together because it's kind of a funny one. It's maybe a little bit strange. So we go in and we go, hey, the first paragraph, I can read the whole thing. I'm allowed, right? So I go, okay. Come on, let me annotate. Okay. So I go, okay, I can read the whole thing, right? The opening scene of the film Marie Antoinette, Sofia Coppola, 2006. Okay, that wasn't important. I probably should have just skipped that. Is set in Austria. A static image of a young Marie Antoinette sleeping in a dark room. Okay, I'm going to pause here because I technically could read this whole passage, but what do you think? Does this seem like a normal intro paragraph to you? Because I look at this and I go, this looks like fluff. This looks like one of those weird intro paragraphs where they just give me kind of like a long hook, but it doesn't actually give me anything important. It's very descriptive. It's very detailed. It's very, maybe this isn't actually important. So I'm going to go, maybe I'm not going to read this whole thing. Okay, so it's talking about the opening scene, the establishing shot. This is still the opening scene. I don't really care what the opening scene is. Blah, 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 blah. Completely unaware this is still the opening scene. I don't care. Blah, 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 blah. While she waits, this is still the opening scene. Holy smokes. Blah, 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 blah. Dressed in a soft velvety. This is not important. Blah, 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 blah. Before being sent off to France. I don't care about any of this. This is anecdotal. Exactly. It's narrative. And this is a humanities passage. This is not what I'm doing here. This is all detail. So I mentioned earlier that sometimes there's a little bit of follow your heart that goes into these rules, right? So even though we go, I'm supposed to read my whole first paragraph, this passage does not fit the mold. I don't need to read it. So I'm not going to. I'm going to go, okay, this passage tells me about the opening scene of the film. So if I'm going to summarize this, I might do something like desk for describe, opening scene of MA for Marie Antoinette. And that's it. I'm done. Don't care. And if you're going, I care deeply about the pug, I get it. But again, we are not reading for our own personal edification. We are reading to answer the questions. And no, I didn't have to read the whole paragraph. I read a couple of first words to just go, this is all blah, 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 don't care. So at a certain point, realistically, I would have read the first sentence. I might have looked at the first words of the next sentence, gone the establishing shot, and then predicted this is all going to be about the scene. Looked at the last sentence, seen dressed in a soft velvety and lavender, and gone, this is all detail, all fluff. I'm not going to read any of it. Cool. So I know if they ask me a question about the opening scene of Marie Antoinette, I will go here because that gives me all of that detail, but I definitely don't need it right now. Because one, they're probably not going to ask about it, but two, if they are going to ask about it, it's one thing, and three, it's not the main idea. Don't care. Skipping it. Okay, so I've got my summary for my first paragraph. I'm going to move on, and I'm going, okay, since this was fluff, probably that next paragraph is going to be more important. Okay, clearing that. Jumping to our next paragraph. Okay. Let's go ahead and go through this one together. So, first sentence, the theme of dressing and redressing, which is accentuated in the opening scene. Look at that. Which is accentuated. Oh, wait. Oops. Go back. Ah. Which is accentuated in the opening scene. They tell me what the opening scene did. The big idea was that it talks about her getting dressed and undressed a lot. I didn't need to read it. They tell me the important part right here. Wow, cool. Love that for me. So I go, okay, it's about dressing and redressing, and it's pursued throughout the film Marie Antoinette, establishing costume as a, oh my gosh, why is this doing this? Sorry. I'm still getting used to annotating in Zoom. I apologize. But I see the word significant, right? And I go, hey, significant, that's a tone word. It's not particularly strong, but it is maybe positive. It's important. I go, okay, it is significant. Maybe this is my thesis. Costume is important. Okay. Woo! Love that. So costume is important in Marie Antoinette. Costumes help. Okay. It's about costume still. It doesn't have a transition word that I think is important. It's not a first or last sentence. I'm not going to read it. So I'm going to go ahead and skip that sentence and imagine that I'm crossing it off while I try to figure out how the heck to annotate this. So I go, okay, all right, skipping the next sentence. Their colors and configurations. Again, nothing to read here that's important. Skip, 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 skip. A character's story. Nothing to read here. Skip, skip, skip. At first glance, the attire. Again, costume. Skip, 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 skip. A closer examination reveals more subtle details. Okay, even though this is the last sentence, it's still talking about costuming and how costuming is important to reading the movie. I don't care. So, Muhammad, that is an incredibly beautiful summary. Okay, check the chat, folks, because Muhammad has given us a beautiful summary of this paragraph. We read one sentence. The point of that sentence is going to be the point of our paragraph. Importance of costumes, and I would specifically note in Marie Antoinette. That's it. So if I could annotate, which I clearly can't, I would write costumes or just cost imp in MA. Chef's kiss. Yes, exactly. Beautiful. And that's the second paragraph. Okay, so notice here, we've read 2 sentences so far. Love that. moving to our third paragraph. Okay, costume design involves conceptualizing and creating garments. Whew, this sentence is tough, but it's my first one, so I'm gonna take my time with it. Costume design involves conceptualizing and creating garments that capture and define the personalities of fictional characters. Okay, so costumes are for personalities. And, ooh, does anyone see a good word in this sentence? A word that says, please, please read me. I'm important. Perhaps even the point of this entire paragraph. Does anyone see that word in the chat? If you see it. It's not normally where it lives. It's therefore. Yeah, we see it therefore. This is my thesis for this paragraph. Okay, and therefore intended to embody the psychological, social, and emotional condition of the character at a particular moment in the screenplay. That sentence was like half of this paragraph. But that's okay, because we're not going to read the rest of it. All right, so we go, okay, costume design is meant to embody the character. And then what do we see next? Should I read this next sentence? Should I read the second sentence in this paragraph? What do we think? Yes or no in the chat? I'm going to wait for some answers. Yeah, we're not going to read it. Or I guess, nah, we're not going to read it. This is not something that we should read because it starts with a for instance, right? For instance is an example. That's not something we read. So I'm going to skip that sentence. And then, okay, I look at the last sentence and it starts with the anachronistic feature. What anachronistic feature? Oh, it's the anachronistic feature, and maybe I don't know what that means, but that's okay, but it's referencing the previous sentence. So even though this last sentence is the last sentence of our paragraph, it's part of the example. I don't care about an example, so I'm not going to read it. And I'm done with this paragraph. So if I'm going to summarize this, I'm going to summarize that first sentence all over again, which is costumes, def or define, condition of care or character, something like that. But yeah, just restating the first sentence because it was the only one that was important. Cool. All right. Now I want to note here, a lot of people get really hung up in these two sentences in particular. A lot of students in their summaries, they're like, it's about anachronism and converse. And they think that's what this paragraph is about because they spent so much time with the two nasty sentences at the end. Don't do it. It's an example. It's not worth your time and it'll just confuse you if you read it. So skip it. It's about how costume design captures a character. That example shows us how the costume design captures a character. Specifically, the way it does it is that the converse represents that Marie Antoinette is young, but we don't care about that right now. So we skip it. Cool. All right. Oops, went the wrong way. Okay. Now, I want to really spend some time with this because I saw someone in the chat note earlier. Oftentimes, we can get a lot of information out of the longest paragraph. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's not. All right, take a look at this paragraph. What do you notice? Other than that it's long, you should notice something right at the beginning that tells you something really important about this paragraph. Perhaps just a word. In the chat when you think you see it. Yeah. It starts with additionally. Wait, additionally? That's a continuation word. Is this whole paragraph continuation? Can I skip this whole paragraph? Yes, you can. You don't need to read it because it is adding to the previous paragraph. Now, I'm probably going to read the first sentence just to confirm, but then the rest I'm just going to kind of blow off. Okay, so I'm going to go additionally in Marie Antoinette, color is used in a nuanced way, not only to describe the characters, but also in order to facilitate a specific look for the whole movie. Okay, so it's expanding on how costumes are meant to build characters. This is talking specifically about the color of those costumes. All right, so we're going, oh, and if this is too blurry for you to read, this is in the ACT paper practice test that Magoosh has. You can find it on our blog. If you just search ACT paper practice test, Magoosh PDF, it has this passage in it. So you can find it if you want to do that. Okay, so we go, great. This is about color and costumes. I can literally skip the rest, the whole dang thing. And if I were really, really low on time, amazing, that would be fine. Now, I might notice a couple of other things about this paragraph. I might notice that we have some positive words at the beginning and then some negative words at the end. So maybe the tone transitions. I might notice that I have some transition words that are about time. So we start at the beginning and we go to the end, and that would be cool, right? So maybe I might note color/tone changes over time in MA. Sure, that would be neat, but I don't need to. If I just read the first sentence of this paragraph, I am fine. So MA, also color, and maybe like 2 arrows up to the previous summary. Great. Okay, now, you wanna know why it's so good that we didn't read the previous paragraph? The color palette of the costumes might be translated to a depiction of Marie Antoinette's inner journey. They literally just told me the whole point of the last paragraph. They walk through how the color changes over the course of the movie, about how Marie Antoinette changes with her costumes. They tell us that right here. So we didn't need to read it. They just tell us. All right, so we go, okay, the color palette might be translated to a depiction of Marie Antoinette's inner journey. The range of colors are comparable. Don't care. This is all detail. Skip, 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 skip. Skip, skip, skip. I might read the as such. That's kind of a conclusion. As such, the costumes have metaphoric meaning. They're symbols of a stage in life and a state of mind. And then I'll read the last one because I see the word thus. The costumes for Marie Antoinette are thus understood as being designed in order to communicate the inner experiences of the characters. So we go, okay, all right, summarize. Does anyone want to throw their summaries in the chat? If you do, go now and I'll comment on them. But while those come in, we would know, okay, probably the thing with the thus is the most important. That's the conclusion, right? So we might go costumes designed for inner journey / experience. Colors equals change in person. That's pretty solid. Yeah, I like that. That's really, really great. So it's talking about how color, well, okay, I'd be careful with color because it also says costumes later, so maybe that's a little too specific, but yeah, it's talking about how it reflects the change in the person. Costume color can depict the progression of the character. That's really great. Careful with color matches the movie tone. It does, but that's maybe not exactly the conclusion that they're coming to here. It's specifically about inner experiences. See how those are like a little bit different? This is actually something that I talk about in our reading specific lesson, which is don't reach. This isn't English class. We want to stay really, really close to what the passage actually says. If we reach, we might miss some questions. Costume, they're important to communicate the story. It's your personality, character expression. Yeah, okay, great. Costume / color change equals inner experience / journey. Love that. Costume design is used in MA to demonstrate the mentalities and personalities of the character. That's great. A little long. See if you can shorten it. How characters communicate character experiences. Great. Love all of this. Awesome. So we go, okay, cool. So color / costumes communicate character experiences / journey. Last paragraph starts with an ultimately, your classic conclusion keyword. Okay, ultimately, costume design in Marie Antoinette allows us to quickly grasp what the characters are all about. I could read the whole thing if I wanted to. I'm probably actually going to skip the middle sentence because I don't want to read it. The costumes conspire with the other cinematic features, generating a symbolic network for telling a story through dress. Okay, so the whole part about conspiring with other cinematic features, that's a little fluffy. Okay, I don't really need to understand that, but it gives us the idea that costume design helps us tell a story and understand the characters. So cost equals imp for MA story or something like that. And we are done. That's the whole dang thing. So reflecting on this. I'm seeing some folks coming through and going, okay, the fact that we're skipping so much of this is stressing me out. And I want to go back and just really quickly demonstrate how much we skipped. We read 2 sentences here. We read 3 sentences here. 1 sentence here. 1 sentence here. 1 sentence here. 1 sentence here. Okay, so we skipped a ton of this. And if you're going, wait, what if it asks about something that I didn't read? Stay with me. If it asks about something you didn't read, we can do that keyword skimming strategy where we go, okay, what is the detail? Okay, is that detail related to the opening scene? That's in the first paragraph. Is it related to the color of the costumes? It's probably in that additionally paragraph where we come up with color. Is it related to costume design in general? Probably in the second paragraph. Is it about the inner journey? It's probably in that second to last paragraph. So if we ask about something very specific, we are going to go to the paragraph summary of that specific idea and then track it down with keyword skimming within that paragraph. But if they ask us about the point of a paragraph, we know it from the summary. If they ask us about the point of the passage, we know that already. If they ask us about how the author feels about something, we know it already. If they ask us about the color in the middle of the passage, in the middle of the film, we don't know that, but we know it's in the additionally paragraph. So even though we didn't read most of this, we can answer half of the questions without going back. And the questions that we do need to go back for, we can hone in on probably the exact sentence that we want to answer the question. So if this stresses you out, you're going, there's no way I can answer the questions. If Jen or Milton wants to hit us with the link to that paper practice test again, you can answer those questions with this. I know because I do it in every one of my reading classes. So at this point in my live classes, we would go to our second lesson and we would do questions for this passage and my students kill it with just what we read. So if this is something where you're going, no way, try it and try it on your own because this is a life-changing strategy and it works for science. So on science, we will be really aggressive with reading any of the paragraphs, typically just first sentences. And then when we get to our diagrams, we're not going to read all of the data. We're going to look for trends, just like we look for summaries. So the exact same strategies apply in science. Again, in my live classes, we do that during the science lesson. We're not going to do it today, but I recommend, again, trying it on your own, maybe with that paper practice test PDF, because it saves a ton of time and it sets you up for success to get through the questions quickly. Okay, final takeaways before we do Q&A. Test structure, timing, and scoring lead to test strategy. So this is from the first half. Use your checkpoints, skip questions, and guess with process of elimination to get the most points out of your time. Then study quality is more important than study quantity. So make sure that you are consistent with your study and not cramming. Take practice tests. They are extremely important, but don't take too many or you're likely to burn out and build bad habits. And address your mistakes. Make sure that you are learning from them and not just moving on. And then what we just learned, ACT reading and science passages are not the same as reading in real life. We are not going to read every word, but we're also not going to jump straight to the questions because we can't hold all of them in our heads and it doesn't set us up for success. So we're going to do an initial skim, reading only the important sentences. We're going to summarize as we go, chunking it out into paragraphs or into diagrams. And we are going to then keyword skim for anything we can't answer to narrow in on what we want. All right, that is it for our live stream. So if that's all you were here for, see you later. If you would like to use this code, it is 20% off of our live classes. If you want to dig back into that passage and find out, can we answer the questions? You can find out next week in our next live cohort. Or you can learn other things like how to approach the science section, how to approach the math section, all of that good stuff. Also, we are doing our raffle, I think, right now. So if you are interested in finding out if you won, stick around. And if you have questions, now's the time. So I'll stick around to answer questions if you want to ask those now. Otherwise, see you later. I'm so glad that this was helpful. Thank you for sticking around for 2 hours. And if you have a question on when's the next live class, if you're looking for our live classes, like the whole class, the 8 sessions, we have one starting next Monday. So like this coming Monday, like 3 days away. If you would like to join us, code's right here. We actually have 2 starting on Monday. If you're looking for another free live class, we will probably do one of these for SAT, I think at the end of this month. Not entirely sure when we'll do more of those, but we do have a bunch of YouTube videos. I put a couple of YouTube videos out. If you were curious about what I was talking about with reading prediction, I've got a video on that I really recommend reading. It can help a lot. Okay, great. Oh, question. What are any keywords to know when I skip? So those detail and continuation ones are going to be really, really useful. So like detail, for example, to illustrate, continuation also, moreover, furthermore. But basically, if you don't have any clues to read it, you should probably just skip it. Okay. Thanks, everybody, again. Okay. What else have we got? Oh, I love these strategies too, Diamond. Ooh, we've got a question about the online ACT, and I'm going to be honest, I've really only had like 1 student to take the online ACT, and it is a little bit different because you can't mark up the passage in the same way, you can't mark up the problem in the same way. What I would recommend doing is giving it a search on the internet. Because I personally don't feel super qualified to give that information right now, because it is so much more common to take the paper ACT. So you're in kind of an interesting situation. I would recommend doing a search. I'm gonna bet we have information on it on our blog. My big recommendation is if you have scratch paper, to really take advantage of that. And you should still be able to skip questions, still do that. It's going to be mostly the same experience, but instead of marking up the test itself, you'll be marking up your scratch paper. The other thing that I would say is that practicing online with something like Magoosh would help you have a more realistic experience to what you're going to be doing on test day. So online prep might be a good call for you. Hope that helps, Sean. Oh, great question. What was my score and what were my best and worst subjects? Man, I can't remember section by section, but I did get a 35 when I was in high school. That was my score. I took it a couple of times. I took it for the first time in like 8th grade for like some program. Did not do as well then, but I ended up with a 35. I think my worst subject was science, which is pretty funny because I went on to study science in college, which I think is just an indicator that the science section is not really about science. It is much more about reading and time management than anything. But that was something I struggled with in high school. I have since figured it out. I think my perfectionism got the best of me when I was in high school, and I ended up reading way too much, really trying to understand it, and that was wrong. That was foolish. Okay, let's see. What else have we got? Oh, I'm ready. Let's do it. And I'll come back to questions in just a second, but yes, let's do our giveaway. I'll just wait. Oh, and great question. If you ask the questions on a Magoosh YouTube video, will you guys respond? Typically we will. Sometimes it'll be me. Okay, drum roll. Sean! Woo! Yeah! Okay, so Sean is our winner. Not sure if Sean's still with us, but we'll be sending an email out after the fact. Yay, Sean's still here. That's amazing. So you can pick, we'll send you an email with information, or Ken will send an email. Oh, I'm late. Delay on my end. But we'll send you an email and you can select what time, what dates work best for you. Maybe I'll see you on Monday. Oh, wait, no, sorry. I said the wrong thing. Send Hien an email. Hien will not email you. Hien's been in the chat the whole time. Hien and Milton have been our rocks. Okay, all right. So now that we're handling things with that free live class, again, that 20% discount is available to everybody else. And again, I hope to see some of you in our live classes. And if I don't, I will see you here on YouTube. Okay, I'm still sticking around for questions though, so if you've got more, throw them in the chat. I'm gonna kind of take them as they come in, and if I've missed one of yours, feel free to throw it in the chat again. Okay, I'm scrolling back. What else have we got? Oh, a really great question from Diamond. I'm hoping you're still here. How much background science should I know to help with passages? Really only what you've done in school. I do not recommend doing additional science studying for the science section. This is actually something that I talk about in the science lesson of our live classes. But there is technically a basic science question type, but it doesn't appear very frequently. And there's really no way of telling what's going to appear on it. It could be something from biology, something from chemistry, something from geology, something from earth sciences, physics, there's really no telling. So I mostly recommend just skipping them and then coming back and making a guess. I don't recommend doing really any additional basic science studying before you go into the test. It's really more about reading and your strategy and your time management. So none beyond what you already have. Okay. So we're not doing a science example today, unfortunately, but the same strategies apply. So I recommend practicing on your own, maybe with that paper practice test from Magoosh, or you can join us for our live classes if you'd like to sign up with this 20% discount code, and we'll do several science passages together in our 4th lesson. Okay, question. Do I have any tips for choosing a math problem answer that I can't solve? Yeah, so that idea of thinking logically, maybe going, is 1 too big? Is 1 too small? Do I expect this answer to be something plus something or something minus something? Do I expect it to have a root? Do I expect it to have something like that? That's going to be really, really helpful. That said, if you're looking for an answer like pick C, that is not really something I recommend. If you're really low on time, just pick a random answer choice, but like A, B, C, D, it doesn't matter, or E, it doesn't matter. They're all equally likely. So if you're guessing randomly, just pick one, it doesn't matter. But see if you can do some logical elimination first. Similarly, if you have time, sometimes methods like back solving or plugging in numbers can be really useful. Hope that helps. Yeah, online practice can be difficult to annotate. Highly recommend just having a piece of paper to practice, or if you're doing like a practice test, see if you can print it. It's a lot of paper. It's not super green, but it does help create a more realistic experience if you're doing a paper test. Oh, question. Would I recommend we take ACT or SAT? My recommendation, one, make sure that all of your schools take both, because if one of your schools only takes one of the tests, you should do that one. But what I recommend is if you have time, take an ACT practice test, take an SAT practice test. Which percentile score is higher? Commit to that one and just do that one. And that's my recommendation. A thing to note, ACT, the math I find is maybe a little bit more challenging. It's faster paced and there's maybe some more weird concepts on it. The questions themselves are maybe less complex, but one thing that I would note is that it only counts toward a fourth of your total score, whereas in SAT, math is half of your total score. So that's something that you might consider. But for the most part, like the reading sections are pretty equivalent. The SAT writing and ACT English are pretty much the same thing. And then most of the math content is similar. Science is kind of its own thing on ACT, and that can pull people down if they're not prepared for it. But if you apply these strategies that we learned today, that can actually be a pretty strong section. So I would recommend try it is my big recommendation, and then commit to the one you're already doing better on. Okay. Where did I go to college? I went to the University of Washington. So in my home state, was studying science. Science is pretty strong at UW. Go Dogs. Okay. Oh, how many times can the ACT be taken? I'm not entirely sure if there's a lifetime limit. I'd give that a Google. I would give that a Google. Let's see. Do we have more questions? Okay. La, la, la. So Chidera, I suggest skimming first. So that was something we actually covered earlier in the live stream. So if you want to rewatch this once it's posted, I would recommend doing that because we cover that. When's the next ACT? Coming up. I think it's in like a week. Yeah, there are more coming up this summer. A really easy thing to look up. ACT test dates 2021. Look for the official sources. That's all. Okay, what else have we got? If you want to sign up for these live classes, again, you can just go to act.magoosh.com, or for SAT, sat.magoosh.com. You can also just Google Magoosh ACT and it'll come up right away and it'll just be on the plans page. Ooh, what are some trick math answers that we should watch out for? I mentioned one earlier, but if there's two variables in a problem and they're asking you to solve for one of them, the other variable will almost definitely be an answer choice. That's a hot tip. Another one is an intermediate step. So if you have to solve for like the total of 3 weeks, week number 1 will be an answer. Week number 2 will be an answer. Week number 3 will be an answer. And then the total will be an answer. That's a classic move, is to do something you solve for on the way to the right answer. That one's super rude. There are other ones like misinterpretations. If they're saying if they're doing something like, a percent increase or a percent decrease, the percent of is going to be a classic answer, or just reversing percents with rates, taking the rate backwards, classic. There's a lot of classic wrong answer traps. Those are some of the common ones. In our live classes, we talk about the different wrong answer traps that you see with specific question types. That's also something we talk about in the online lessons in Magoosh. But I highly recommend, if you're going through problems and you miss something, you pick a wrong answer, interrogating, why did I pick that? And if you notice, oh, that was something I did on the way, or, oh, I added when I was supposed to multiply, that's probably a classic trap. And that's something you should note to look out for in the future. So you can almost learn it by doing it. Okay. What else have we got? Any tips on science? Sean, you'll learn in our live class. But big tips on science, this one's the big one, right? Is to not waste too much time reading, skip a lot, only read the important stuff. Most of the important stuff is in diagrams. If you've got paragraphs, really prioritize firsts and lasts. Other things, so in reading, we're typically going to predict. If we have science questions that are more based on reading, like on paragraphs, text, we're typically going to predict. If we've got questions that are more based on diagrams, put your fingers on the piece of data that you're trying to find and just go one step at a time. That's one of my big recommendations, and look out for traps. Do I recommend flashcards? Great question, Lakshmi. It depends on what for. So flashcards can help if you're like on the bus. You really don't have enough time to do like higher quality, more in-depth study. They can be useful for like memorizing formulas, but this is something I talk about in the reading lesson, but memorizing vocabulary is not super useful for this test. So I definitely would not recommend spending a ton of time with vocabulary flashcards, especially if you've got a limited time studying. Your best bet, if you're trying to get the most out of your study time, is to do it sitting down with a pencil and paper, working through lessons, working through questions, reviewing your mistakes. Those are going to be the big ones. So do I recommend flashcards if you're trying to memorize formulas? Sure. But typically using those formulas is going to be more useful. So my big answer is I'm not a huge flashcard fan, if I'm being honest, not for this test. Oh, great question. Will the live sessions be at the same time as this one? So we do have live sessions at 4 p.m. Pacific, which is the same time as this one. We also in June have live sessions at 1 p.m. Pacific. So that's 3 hours earlier. And then in July, we have some at 10 a.m. Pacific, so earlier in the day. So you can check out, again, our plans page on our Magoosh ACT website to see when they're offered. Let's see, anything else? Oh, I have problems in the literary narrative and natural science passages. Okay, so my number one tip is to do the passages you're comfortable with first. So do the other ones first. Get comfortable, get feeling good, get on track with your time, maybe even ahead on your time, and then go into the ones that you struggle with more. Natural science is a great one for skimming. Those you can typically skip a ton. One big thing that I'm going to recommend for natural science, this is something I talk about in the science lesson, but it also applies to natural science reading passages. You don't have to know the details. You don't have to know the fancy terminology to succeed. Don't do it. So instead of going, oh man, I have to read all about what a protoplanetary disk is, don't. Figure out what they're saying about the protoplanetary disk. Are they saying that scientist A had an opinion on it and then scientist B disagreed and then scientist A was laughed out of town, but then scientist C discovered something that brought scientist A's theory back into popularity, and then now they're doing more research with new object E that will help bring the two theories together. I don't know what a protoplanetary disk is. I don't know what any of the theories are. I don't know what the new scientific object is. It's okay, but I get the relationship, and that's what they're going to ask about. So my big thing is don't get freaked out by the technical language. It's not important. It's there to scare you. Focus on the relationships, the same thing that we were doing here. We didn't care what the anachronistic feature was. We didn't care about the fancy film words. It didn't matter. We focused on relationships. Same thing here. And then literary narrative, those are typically going to be, those can be more difficult to skim because they don't have that paragraph structure. Focus on tone. focus on transition words. Those are going to be really, really helpful for getting through those. And then I have, again, I'm going to plug that video on predicting for reading again. It's really, really useful for coming up with your own answers before you look at the traps. The traps are really convincing, so don't look at them. Come up with your own answer. Okay. Oh, don't correct each section on a test before finishing it. Do the whole dang thing and then review it. Again, it's just going to have a more realistic experience as test day, and it's important to practice realistically. So yeah, don't correct it until the end. I know it's hard to wait, but that's my recommendation. And then question, how about not solving a whole passage in the reading section? Again, it depends on what type of score you're aiming for. If you really struggle with timing and you're not aiming for a perfect score in the reading section, which is okay, that might be a good move. I would check out, there are like, you can look up like ACT reading raw score conversion, and it'll show you about how many questions you can miss and still get the score you're looking for. And if you can miss a whole passage's worth of questions and a little bit more, that might be a good strategy. What I probably recommend is just save your most difficult passage for the end. If you run out of time, you might have been planning to miss those questions anyway, or you might have missed those questions anyway. Yeah, it really depends on what type of score you're aiming for. Hope that helps. Okay, and I think that's the end. So I'm going to go ahead and end our stream, but thank you so much for being here today. Hope to see some of you in our live classes, and if not, I hope to see you on YouTube later. All right, bye-bye.